A while back, right after I had ordered my Kindle Scribe, I took a week-long trip with my family. In an agreement that was more of a pseudo-competition with my father, we both left our phones at home. I retained an Apple Watch and a Kindle Scribe as pieces of technology on this venture, and seeing how the Apple Watch only worked with Wi-Fi, I basically just used the Scribe all week. Originally, I thought this would just be a typical use case for the new Kindle, but I discovered a few things that I thought were worth mentioning. It seems like most of the Kindle Scribe videos out there are more of just a tech review than an actual usage and then reporting on that. Now, I'm technically also guilty of this, so I thought I would make this kind of as a follow-up to provide my honest thoughts after a week with just the Kindle Scribe. Alright, so that's pretty obvious, but to somebody who doesn't own a Scribe, the scale of this device might seem unimportant. After lugging the Scribe to the beach and handling it in the car for a week, I can confidently report that this thing is chunky. It's not as heavy as one would expect, but it's the size of a large iPad. This is both a blessing and a curse. It's not the most convenient for reading in bed or carrying by hand, but it's great for digesting more lengthy text or writing on. It's akin to the size difference between an iPhone and an iPad almost. Sure, they can do the same things, but some tasks are just better designed for one than the other. In this case, I think the smaller Kindle is a lot better for reading in bed or just putting in your pocket, whereas the Scribe is obviously built to read larger texts or to be taking notes, but you really shouldn't be trying to do one with the other or vice versa. The writing capabilities are what you're paying for with the Scribe, but in typical Amazon fashion, they've done the bare minimum and then just moved on to the next product. The various pen styles are nice, and the lasso is surprisingly effective, but the lack of rotation and different drawing layers makes the Scribe challenging for anything more than just writing. I did take some notes on mine for a class, and that was pretty nice, but if you need to do any drawings for, say, a bio class, or you just want to make some sketches, this is not the tool for you. The point of the Scribe is very clearly for writing and not drawing. Unless your drawing is straightforward and doesn't require lots of editing tools, the Scribe will really not be the ideal way to make it. Now, this is a bit of an odd point, because the browser on the Kindle is never really a huge selling point. But while I was gone, if I needed to look up anything, the Kindle browser did the job surprisingly well. Sure, the update speed was slow, and it's buried in this More tab, but I actually enjoyed my time browsing the web. It probably won't become your default browsing tool, but I could honestly see some people choosing to read the morning news on this thing. It would be an effort, but maybe you prefer that to the easy scrolling on your phone. Anyhow, I thought I should point it out as more of a detail that I noticed and appreciated. If you own a regular Kindle or a Paperwhite, you know that these things are basically immortal. Keep the brightness down, go on airplane mode, and charge it once a month at worst. Before leaving for my trip, I decided to put this baby to the test. I loaded it with library books, charged it to 100%, put it in airplane mode, and set off. Over the course of the week, I averaged at least 5 hours a day reading on this thing, so I can safely say that the battery, while not as impressive as the smaller models, holds its own for the functionality. The Scribe obviously has the writing features, which I think run the battery more, and it also has an auto brightness adjust that I kept on for convenience. I wanted this to be a realistic use case. At the time of returning home, the Scribe possessed a proud 31% charge, and that was with the reading, drawing, and some web browsing in there as well. It's not the unkillable beast of the regular Kindle, but it certainly holds its own for a couple of days. And compared to the life of an iPad, I feel like the Scribe comes out definitively on top. Here begins the more serious flaws that I discovered with the Scribe. Now, I won't pretend to know how e-ink works, but it's something to do with the particles of the screen changing their charge or magnetic polarity. Not quite sure, but I know that magnets mess it up. I've tried to find a case that would not render my $300 investment useless, and yet I fell short. I feel like this is more of a bug, because it only manifested itself a few days into the trip, but when the Scribe is in this case, the writing towards the bottom of the page is offset. No case? Works fine. Case, writing is glitchy. Not quite sure why, but it meant that I had to remove the Scribe every time I wanted to write on a page that utilized the bottom 10%. This was extremely frustrating since it's a pretty snug fit to be taking in and out of a few times a day, but maybe other cases don't have this issue. I just don't really feel like spending the money to find out. This is a pretty known issue, is that some cases can mess up your Scribe. It's pretty unfortunate, but that just seems to be the way it is, and yeah, this was pretty disappointing. Now, this is probably the biggest shortcoming with the Scribe that I discovered. While erasing, the Scribe would randomly not erase for 3 to 10 seconds, and it would freeze with what you wanted to erase taken out, but also the template lines behind it were stayed erased. Now, to be clear, normally when you erase on the Scribe, it's supposed to erase everything that you hit with the eraser, and then it refreshes to bring those template lines back. So if you're erasing something on a grid paper, obviously the grid lines will get erased as well, but then when you refresh the page, or when you're done erasing, the page would refresh and you get those lines back. But with this bug, it seemed that the Scribe would kind of pause and leave everything not erased. And sometimes it would only erase half of what you were doing if it was clear that I was going to struggle on this erasing. Now, I'm not sure. I feel like temperature might have been something to do with it, because when I left it out in the sun, or not left it out, when I was reading in the sun for a long period of time, or when it was really cold, this seemed to happen more, but I'm really not sure if that's what causes it. Either way, it was really frustrating because it would really slow down the writing experience from being very fluid to now having to pause and wait and consider what you're going to erase, if it's worth erasing, that sort of thing. Now, as a comparison point, I recently got to try writing on a friend's iPad using the Apple Pencil and this paper-like screen protector. The feel wasn't quite as sharp as the Scribe, but more importantly, the experience was more cluttered. If you've used an iPad, you probably know what I mean. You have to write in some app. Different iPad apps are constantly trying to get you to subscribe or giving you a bunch of tools that you don't need right now. And the Scribe has a few glitches, and I admit that it's not ideal, but I did really appreciate how straightforward the writing experience was. The iPad was almost more overwhelming. If you're not in Apple Notes, you're probably in an app that wants you to subscribe to some premium feature. That's going to be all over the place. The Scribe is just straightforward. It only does the writing, and that's what it's good for. Now, again, there are issues with that. I'm not trying to downplay those. I'm just saying in comparison to the iPad, the Scribe presents a very streamlined, very simple and reliable writing experience in terms of what you get and what you don't get. Now, to be fair, the iPad obviously does a lot more than the Scribe. The Scribe is just good for writing, for journaling, school notes, and even letters. The Scribe is a lot better of a tool than the iPad probably is. But if you need to do more complex tasks, the Scribe just isn't built for that. And that's it. These were the main bullet points for my time with the Kindle Scribe. During that time, I had no phone, so I really got to appreciate the Scribe for what it is. These are my unedited thoughts. I'm not trying to convince you of anything here. I'm just trying to lay out the experience that I had. I think that the Scribe is nice and simple and streamlined, but it is underpowered and buggy for anything complicated. It worked great for a writer and a reader, but not necessarily for an artist or even a student. I think the key takeaway is that no piece of tech is perfect, and you should really figure out what you actually need before you get it. If you just want to read books on a big screen and write notes by hand, the Scribe does both of those things, and it's pretty darn good at it. But if you're looking for a tool that you can integrate into a more complex workflow, you should look elsewhere. The Scribe has a purpose, but trying to make it what it's not will make it constantly disappointing. But that's just my take, my experience. If you have experienced something different, feel free to let me know, and otherwise, stay tuned for more.